Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Corey Hughes Bloody History. So today we're going to continue on with some John Armstrong, but we're going to clarify some stuff from yesterday, or the last show. It was a couple days ago. So I appear to have misinterpreted some of the dates that were involved here, but actually my misinterpretation is actually better because it points out that the series of events that led to multiple Oswalds being at Beauregard, Beauregard and Stripling, it's pretty obvious now that this is real. This is something that actually happened, and John Armstrong's documentation will clarify this. So, Franchetta Schubert started off the interview by saying, when she was in the 1953 to 1954 school year, she was in the 7th grade. That's correct. And then see, John Armstrong caught it in the interview, but I didn't. He goes, and what year was this, 54, 55? And she didn't seem to give a clear answer. And so, but in going back through harveyandlee.net and reading some of the articles here on Stripling, it becomes obvious that there was even more obfuscation than what I alluded to. So I'm going to read this article and go over the clarifications for yesterday's episode. The title of this article is Lee and Harvey in 3 consecutive school semesters. For 3 consecutive school semesters in 3 different cities, it's easy to see which schools each Oswald attended. For the fall semester of 1953, Lee Oswald attended Public School 44 in New York City. At the very same time, Harvey Oswald was enrolled in Beauregard Junior High in New Orleans. The following semester, spring 1954, both Lee and Harvey attended Beauregard. According to Lee Oswald's report cards published in the Warren volumes, Lee was in homeroom 303 on the 3rd floor at Beauregard. Harvey was in the same school in Myra DeRoos's homeroom in the basement cafeteria at Beauregard. In the fall semester of 1954, Lee continued attending Beauregard in New Orleans, but Harvey left New Orleans in the summer of 1954 and moved to Fort Worth, where he began attending Stripling Junior High School. So Franchetta Schubert's memory of him was from the 54-55 school year. And she saw, this is the funny thing, remember? She saw him, she thought it was December, January, because he had on the brown leather jacket and it was cold out and stuff. But when we listened to Frank Coodlady explained that he looked like on this paperwork he was there for the first 6 weeks of that school year. So there might be some more obfuscation or confusion going on as to what dates those were. But to clarify from what I screwed up yesterday, it appears as though Lee Oswald, remember, the Lee and the Harvey are notations or labels that were given by John Armstrong, and I'm just acknowledging his work, right? I'm not completely, totally, well, I am kind of mostly sold on this, but something in my brain is preventing me from just giving it the green light. I don't know what that is, but every single thing I read here indicates to me that there was most certainly 2 children named Lee Harvey Oswald who were both raised as part of some CIA program. To me, that seems pretty obvious at this point. So the fall semester of 1953, Lee Oswald at Public School 44 in New York City. You know, I thought I had read from Armstrong previously that there was some more obfuscation and evidence of a second school in New York that was being attended in Queens. But I haven't gotten to that here yet. Lee Oswald at Public School 44 in New York City and Harvey Oswald at Beauregard Junior High in New Orleans, fall semester 1953. Lee Oswald attended PS 44 in the Bronx during the fall semester of 1953 without incident. But where was Harvey Oswald and what was he doing in the summer and fall of 1953? Louise Robertson was a housekeeper in New York City employed by Marguerite Oswald Impostor for 6 weeks in the summer of 1953 to clean her apartment 2 or 3 days per week. Mrs. Oswald, the impostor, told Louise that she had brought her son to New York so that he could have mental tests performed at the Jacobi Hospital. Could young Harvey Oswald, instead of truanting, have been spending some of his days receiving psychiatric evaluation, mental tests, drug-induced hypnosis? Mrs. Robertson remembered that she was working in their small New York City apartment shortly before Mrs. Oswald, the impostor, left New York City in the summer of 1953, but she did not know where they had gone. Question: How and why could the often financially destitute Marguerite Oswald afford a housekeeper in New York City? In the summer of 1953, 12-year-old William Henry Timmer was living with his grandmother in the small community of Stanley, North Dakota. Timmer and his friends were riding bicycles when they noticed an older boy riding a bicycle nearby. The boy introduced himself as Harv, or Harvey, said he came from New York City, and soon began talking about communism. He took a pamphlet about communism from his back pocket and showed it to the boys. Following the assassination, Timmer's mother wrote a letter to President Johnson and advised that young Oswald had briefly lived in Stanley, North Dakota, and knew her son. This was the first time that the small, slender, introverted Oswald referred to himself as Harvey. All right, so allegedly the first appearance of the name Harvey is in 1953. But as we went over yesterday, there was a notation that said that Harvey Oswald had been around since 47. So I need to get further through this to understand that contradiction. Note, JFK researchers traveled to Stanley, North Dakota and interviewed several people who remembered Marguerite Oswald when she briefly resided in Stanley. In the fall of 1953, while Lee Oswald was in the 8th grade at PS 44 in the Bronx in New York, Harvey Oswald and his caretaker mother were living at 126 Exchange Place in New Orleans. Harvey was enrolled part-time in the 8th grade at Beauregard Junior High, and because he was a part-time student, he was not assigned a homeroom. On page 817 of Warren Volume 22, there was a copy of Oswald's cumulative school records at Beauregard. The first row, highlighted in yellow, is the fall semester of 1953 and shows that Oswald attended a general science class, a physical education class, and attended 89 days of school with only one absence. The second row is for the last half of the 8th grade, spring semester of 54. The third row shows final grades, absences, and tardies for the entire 1953 to 54 school year, the 8th grade. And Armstrong has some documents here. The first one says 1953 Beauregard Junior High School record showing Harvey Oswald attending 89 days of school during the fall semester of 1953. At the same time, Lee Oswald attended PS 44 in New York City. See Harvey's complete attendance and grade information for the fall of 1953 semester below. So right here we have on one page we have two different documents here from two different schools. One's dated October 18th. God, I can't read that date. 1954. Is that what it says? I can't read that. But it's clearly from PS 44 in New York. And then we have the following is set forth as a summary inventory of numerical academic averages earned for the periods indicated. And it has, sure enough, from Beauregard Junior High School, 1953 to 54, general science, physical education. 53 to 54, report 2. These must be like different semesters. But clearly, somebody attended that school starting in 1953 through 55. Let me read the note here. Wilfred Head, assistant principal at Warren Eastern High School in New Orleans, provided Harvey Oswald's grade and attendance records for Beauregard Junior High School 8th and 9th grade and Warren Easton High School 10th grade to the FBI. The record above shows Harvey's grades under 1953 to 1954 Report 1, General Science and Physical Education, which is the first half of the 53-54 school year, the fall semester of 1953. So yeah, looking at these two documents, they definitely conflict. All right, next. The document above shows that Harvey Oswald attended 89 days and was absent just one day in 1953. This is another document showing that that is correct. This is down at Beauregard Junior High School. Next document on the right, the notation says the above record continues the text from the bottom of the page at left. Assistant Principal Wilfred Head advised the FBI that the abbreviation RE-AD represents readmitted and added that the numbers set forth opposite these abbreviations would represent the total number of school days attended. Harvey Oswald attended just 89 days of school at Beauregard during the fall semester of 1953. The three documents above clearly show that Russian-speaking Harvey Oswald attended Beauregard Junior High School in New Orleans in the fall of 1953, highlighted in yellow. The New York City school record published by the Warren Commission, CE 1384, shows that at the same time, Lee Oswald was attending PS 44 in New York City, fall of 1953, highlighted in yellow. While Russian-speaking Harvey was in New Orleans, Lee was in New York from September through December 1953. So that's the clarification there. During that school year, 1953 to 54, You've got Harvey Oswald. Now, Harvey Oswald is allegedly the one who got arrested on November 22nd. And Lee Oswald, this is just designations that Armstrong gave to these boys. But, in that interview you listened to from Myra DeRoos clearly indicates there was a boy who identified himself only as Harvey. And that boy also showed up in North Dakota. However, the official story doesn't have any information on North Dakota. The official story says that there was no North Dakota, that North Dakota didn't happen. That's the official story. So, yeah, based on just these 3 documents alone, it's pretty clear they screwed up somehow and they moved one child, not the other. One thing I can't get over is Armstrong is saying that at some point, both of these kids, it would be fall 1954 semester at Beauregard, both of these kids were there, right? Isn't that what he's saying? That's a little odd. How the fuck are you going to have 2 Lee Harvey Oswalds in the same school? See, it's little things like that make me wonder how this happened. How did this get pulled off? Because I can't see them having 2 kids who look pretty damn similar to each other despite the height difference with the same exact name. What the fuck? Like, why would you do that? How could you possibly do that? How could nobody notice it? How could that even be real? That's something that I'm having a hard time coming to grips with. I can understand the CIA doing this obfuscation bullshit, but I can't see them putting 2 different kids in the same school with the same name. It just doesn't jive with me. And it seems that Ed Vobel seems to have known both of them, right? That's a problem. That's a big problem. Jim, maybe we should start digging into Ed Vobel, Voebel. All right, spring semester 1954. Lee in homeroom 303 on the 3rd floor at Beauregard Junior High School. And Harvey in Myra DeRoos's homeroom, the basement cafeteria at Beauregard. All right, so hopefully he can explain this. Myra DeRoos was the girls' physical education teacher at Beauregard during the 53 to 54 school year. Myra had a homeroom in the basement cafeteria, but for only 1 year. At the beginning of spring semester in January 54, Harvey Oswald walked into Myra DeRoos's 8th grade homeroom in the basement. Basement cafeteria and handed Myra his file. Myra told me, well, this is the first day he came to my homeroom. He handed me this file. When I read his name was Lee Harvey Oswald, I said to him, how do you want to be called? And he told me to call him Harvey. So I always called him Harvey. I knew him only as Harvey. This was the second time that the thin, slender young man called himself Harvey. In 1954, young Oswald wanted to be called Harvey. So after talking with Bill Timmer and Myra DeRoos, I began referring to the smaller, thinner, quiet Oswald as Harvey. Okay, so that's the origin of his determining that he should call this smaller Oswald Harvey. Now, let's see if he can explain how the hell they got away with having both of these in the same school at the same time. Myra described young Harvey as a little fellow, scrawny, skinny, and quiet. He came to the middle of my chest about 4'6" tall. A personal history sheet for Harvey Oswald was never found among Beauregard Junior High School records. Lee Oswald, however, did fill out a personal history sheet when he began attending Beauregard in January 1954. Lee Oswald listed his height at 5'5" and his weight at 135, which was very different from the description of Harvey Oswald as remembered by Myra DeRoos. In 1954, Lee Oswald was much heavier and slightly taller than Myra, whereas Harvey Oswald was very thin and quite a bit shorter than Myra. She saw Harvey nearly every day before school, sitting on the front steps waiting for the school to open, and thought he was lonely. She saw him in her homeroom class in the school library and after school riding bicycles on the school grounds with Ed Vobel. On one occasion after school, Vobel ran up to Myra and shouted, "Miss DeRoos, come quick, come quick. A piano fell on Harvey." Myra and fellow teacher Dorothy Duvik followed Vobel into the basement cafeteria and found Harvey on the floor with a small upright piano lying across his legs. The two women lifted the piano off of Harvey, and then, with the principal's permission, Myra drove Harvey to Monte Lepra Clinic on Canal Street after examination by a physician. Myra drove Harvey to his home on Exchange Alley and asked where his mother was. Harvey replied, "She's working in a bar." A photograph of Harvey's caretaker, the Marguerite Oswald imposter, was taken during the spring of 1954 in the apartment on Exchange Alley. So the picture that he's demonstrating here, which was taken in 1954 in Exchange, it's actually 126 Exchange Place. It's clearly the other Oswald the other Marguerite Oswald. Like, to me, the absolute slam dunk proof of any of this is when you go through the pictures of the Marguerite Oswalds up until the early 1960s, maybe late 1950s. All the pictures are of one woman, but then they suddenly switch. And then you'll find some other pictures that are seemingly backdated of this other woman who seems to have a mole under her eye and wears glasses, whereas the original was mostly an attractive woman who didn't. So, all the pictures of this stuff are at harveyandlee.net in case you want to read along. He doesn't have a very good menu or a sitemap. And so this particular page I'm reading comes from harveyandlee.net/school/stripling.html if you want to find it. March 2nd, 1954 was Mardi Gras, and young Harvey Oswald was watching the parade on Canal Street, a half a block from his home on 126 Exchange Place. In the National Archives, I found and copied several photos that were taken of the parade, and Harvey Oswald is in one of these photos. In 2002, I sent Myra DeRoos a photo of a young boy watching the parade with a handwritten notation on the back of the photo, Mardi Gras 1954. I asked Myra if she could identify the young boy in the photo. Myra wrote to me and said, "I've had 4 people look at these photos who knew Oswald at this time at Beauregard, and they and myself agreed it was a picture of him." All right, very interesting. I'm looking at the picture. I can't really say that that's Oswald. While Harvey and his caretaker mother were living in the small apartment on Exchange Alley, Lee Oswald and his tall, nice-looking mother were living 3.5 miles away in apartment 1545 St. Mary's Street. The apartment building was owned and operated by Julian and Myrtle Evans, who had known the tall, nice-looking Marguerite Oswald for over 20 years. Julian described Marguerite as a beautiful woman with black hair, a real fashion plate who dressed beautifully. Myrtle Evans had known Marguerite Oswald since the early 1930s and had visited her 9 years earlier in Dallas in 1945 when Marguerite was dating Mr. Ekdahl. On February 19, 1954, Marguerite began working at Burt's Shoe Store and listed her address as 1454 St. Mary's. This is the same month that Myra DeRoos LaRue drove Harvey Oswald to his home on Exchange Place after taking him to the Monte Lepre Clinic because he had a piano fall on his legs. Marguerite's former sister-in-law, Hazel Oswald, visited her on several occasions at Burt's. The New Orleans Retail Credit Bureau reports that Marguerite was living on St. Mary's Street from May through October 54, while Lee and his mother were living at 1454 St. Mary's through October. Harvey and Marguerite Oswald Impostor were still living at 126 Exchange Place in the French Quarter. In the spring of 1954, while Harvey was in Myra DeRoos's 8th grade homeroom class in the basement cafeteria, school records published in the Warren Commission volumes showed that Lee Oswald was in homeroom 303 on the 3rd floor of Beauregard. On each and every one of Lee Oswald's 8th grade report cards is the notation 303 and a student progress report that read Lee Oswald, grade 8, homeroom 303. These records show that tall, husky Lee Oswald was in room 303 in the 8th grade at Beauregard, spring semester of 1954, while at the same time, the short, thin, quiet Harvey Oswald was in Myra DeRoos's homeroom class in the basement cafeteria. When I told Myra that Oswald's school report card listed the homeroom as 303, she said, "That's impossible. He was in my homeroom in the basement cafeteria." I then showed Myra the photograph of Harvey Oswald taken at the Bronx Zoo in 1953. She said, "That's him, just like I remember him." Then I showed Myra the classroom photo of the tall, husky Lee Oswald taken in October 1954 at Beauregard that appeared in Life magazine. She looked at the photo a long time and then said, "That's not Harvey. That's not the boy from my homeroom. Look at this boy. He looks like a football player, and Harvey was skinny." Myra saw Harvey Oswald every day during the spring semester of 1954. But after school ended in June of 54, 8th grade, neither Myra nor Ed Vobel ever saw Harvey Oswald again. And he's got 2 pictures here, 2 very well-known pictures. The photo of Oswald at the Bronx Zoo in 1953, where he is 4 foot 8 inches tall. John Pick, his half-brother, testified that this was not his brother at the Warren Commission. When he showed the picture, he said, "This is not my brother." And this person in this picture here has a clear and defined part on the left-hand side. This part will stay with this person for the rest of their goddamn life. To me, it's easy to clearly tell which one was Lee Oswald and which one was not Lee Oswald because the person that we know is Lee Harvey Oswald, the one that went to jail on November 22nd, has that clear and defined part on the left-hand side. The other person, who is probably the original Oswald, does not. So here's a problem I have. I've been studying this for fucking ever. I'm probably the world expert on the Kennedy assassination. I've already read all this Harvey and Lee stuff, but I can't pull the trigger on it. I don't know why. Despite the fact that his evidence is so goddamn rock solid, I can't really argue with it at all. These pictures here are two different boys. Clearly. We have half a dozen to a dozen witnesses that claim to have known one or the other of them. But it sounds so fucking crazy, doesn't it? Sounds so fucking crazy. But this is the CIA for you. All right, let's continue on. Fall semester 1954. Lee at Beauregard Junior High School in New Orleans and Harvey at Stripling. Okay, so let me just point out, he never clarified how the fuck they got away with a whole semester of two of them at the same school, same grade. They don't explain that at all. All right, fall semester 54, Lee at Beauregard, Harvey at Stripling. As the cumulative record above shows, Lee continued to attend Beauregard Junior High School in New Orleans. But where was Harvey? Harvey Oswald graduated from the 8th grade at Beauregard in June 1954. Late that summer, Harvey and his caretaker mother moved from 126 Exchange Place in New Orleans to Fort Worth, Texas. Lee Oswald and his tall, nice-looking mother then moved from 1454 St. Mary's to 126 Exchange Place in the French Quarter, where they would live for the next 2 years. So, you got Harvey Oswald and his mother moving out of 126 Exchange Place, and then you have Lee Oswald and his mother moving into it. Lee Oswald entered the 9th grade at Beauregard, while his mother worked in several department stores selling women's clothing. In the fall of 1954, while Lee and his mother were living in New Orleans, Harvey Oswald and his caretaker mother were living in Fort Worth. Harvey entered the 9th grade at Stripling Junior High, directly across the street from where he and his caretaker mother were living at 2220 Thomas Place. Graduating from the 8th grade at Beauregard, June 1954, Harvey Oswald and his caretaker mother relocated to Fort Worth, Texas in the fall. Harvey Oswald entered the 9th grade at Stripling Junior High, directly across the street from where he and Marguerite Oswald Impostor were living at 2220 Thomas Place. At the same time, Lee Oswald was in the 9th grade at Beauregard Junior High School in New Orleans and was living at 126 Exchange Place. All right, so let me see if I can clarify some of what's going on here. It says Harvey Oswald graduated from the 8th grade at Beauregard in June 54. I don't know if graduated was the right word. I think that's what's screwing me up here. He finished 8th grade, but he didn't graduate. And then it says Lee Oswald and his tall, nice-looking mother then moved into Exchange Place, where they would live the next 2 years. Lee Oswald entered the 9th grade at Beauregard. All right, so you have so we have a semester here. So at some point where was this overlap, the second semester of 53-54? God, that's confusing me. Note, 2220 Thomas Place was the same house where the Marguerite Oswald Impostor stored clothes and furniture when she lived in Benbrook, Texas, across the street from George Bell in 1947. In the fall of 1954, Marguerite and Harvey lived in a small apartment in the rear of this white one-story wood frame building. 9 years later, on November 22nd, 63, after moving many times and living in many different cities, the Marguerite Oswald Impostor was once again living at 2220 Thomas Place and wearing a white nurse's uniform from 1940 through 1963. This house was owned by Mary Ann McCarthy and Martha M. McCarthy. The Marguerite Oswald Impostors repeated contacts with 2220 Thomas Place in 47, 54, and 63, while always wearing a white nurse's uniform makes this location a possible safe house and a smoking gun. All right, Jim, if you're listening, we got a house. We have the house located at 2220 Thomas Place in Fort Worth, owned by an Mary Ann McCarthy and Martha M. McCarthy, We need to do a full background on these guys. Gym teacher Mark Summers, who began teaching at Stripling in 1950, remembered that Oswald was in his gym class. Former Stripling student Bobby Pitts remembered that Oswald attended Stripling with his young brother and that he and Bobby remembered seeing Harvey Oswald standing on the porch at 2220 Thomas Place, directly across the street from Stripling. Former Stripling student Doug Gann, who attended 9th grade at Stripling with Harvey, remembered that he lived across the street from the basketball courts and one or two houses to the left, which exactly describes 2220 Thomas Place, where Marguerite Oswald was once again living at the time of the assassination of JFK. Former Stripling student Franchetta Schubert was in the 8th grade and ate her lunch on the school grounds. Every day she watched Harvey Oswald walk across the street to 2220 Thomas Place for lunch. She described Oswald as a skinny, quiet boy who wore a brown leather jacket and blue jeans. Fran used to see Oswald's mother, remembered she was short, heavy set, and always wore a white nurse's uniform. 1955. Lee Oswald attends Beauregard Junior High School in New Orleans, and Harvey Oswald works full-time at Dolly Shoe Store in New Orleans. In early 1955, Harvey Oswald and his caretaker mother left Fort Worth and returned to New Orleans. The Marguerite Oswald imposter soon found work at the Dolly Shoe Company, while Harvey applied for a work permit on March 11th, listing his address as 126 Exchange Place. Harvey soon began working full-time at Dolly Shoe Store along with his caretaker mother. A copy of his work permit was sent to Mary Miller, a social worker at Beauregard. Mary recalled handling a case that involved a student who lived at Exchange Alley and remembered there was an attendance problem. Harvey had the attendance problem because he was working full-time at Dolly Shoe Store in the spring of 55 when he should have been attending junior high school. While Harvey was working at Dolly Shoe, Lee Oswald was attending Beauregard with a near-perfect attendance record. Store manager Maury Goodman and coworker Reader Pavor remembered that the short, heavy-set Marguerite worked as a barmaid at local bars both before and after she worked for Dolly Shoe. A year earlier, in the spring of 1954, Harvey Oswald told his homeroom teacher, Myra DeRoos, that his mother worked at a bar. I sent Mr. Goodman and Rita photographs of the short, heavy-set Marguerite Oswald imposter in 1954 and photographs of Harvey Oswald from the 56-57 Arlington Heights high school year. Oswald taken at Christmas 1957 at Paul Shoe Store, and the classroom photo of Lee Oswald taken at Beauregard in 54. Neither Mr. Goodman nor Rita recognized either of these people. In April of 1955, Mr. Goodman hired Louis Marzal as store manager, and his first day at work was April the 12th. The day his first son was born. Louis arrived at 10 a.m. and began observing Harvey Oswald and other store employees. While having lunch with Mr. Goodman, Louis recommended they fire young Oswald, which they did. Marguerite was also fired because she repeatedly refused to fill out insurance company bonding forms, which, if completed, may have raised unanswerable questions relating to two different women, both using the name Marguerite Oswald. After Marguerite was fired, Louis recalled that she worked at the Tradewinds Bar on Decatur Street. The Tradewinds Bar on Decatur. Interesting. 1959. Harvey Oswald defects to the Soviet Union. In 1959, Harvey Oswald defected to the Soviet Union. Robert Oswald was interviewed by a Fort Worth newspaper reporter and said his brother Harvey Oswald had attended Stripling Junior High School. Do I have the article here? Is this the one that they're talking about? Yes. All right. So let me see if I can read some of this. It's only one little column. It says, evening, October 31st, 1959. So there's an obvious typo here somewhere. Well, let's see if we can't figure it out. Passport turned in at Moscow by Jack Douglas. Lee Harvey Oswald, and this is a problem, it says 26-year-old ex-Marine when he's really only 20 at this time. It says 26-year-old ex-Marine from Fort Worth is now in Moscow, turned in his American passport and asked for Soviet citizenship Saturday morning. Oswald, whose mother and brother lived there, strode into the American embassy, according to Star Telegram wire service reports, slapped down his passport on the consul's desk and said, "I've made up my mind. I'm through." His mother is Marguerite Oswald, a widow who lived at 3005 Bristol Road until about 2 months ago, and a brother, R.L. Oswald, lives at 7313 Davenport. Oswald's decision, even his presence in Russia, came as a sharp surprise to his family here. Here 3 days. Mrs. R.L. Oswald said her brother-in-law got out of the Marine Corps about a month ago, then came to Fort Worth for a visit. He was here 3 days, and then he said he was going down to New Orleans, the young Miss Oswald said. This is Robert Oswald's wife. He said he wanted to travel a lot, talked about going to Cuba. We said that was a stupid thing to do. This is a stupid thing doing now, too, she added. This is more stupid than that other. The young Mrs. Oswald said she didn't know her brother-in-law very well. We don't keep in touch very good, but I sure didn't think he would do a thing like that. Just a kid. Oh, no, exclaimed the brother here after reading the first 2 paragraphs of the Wire story from Moscow. He is just a kid was the only explanation the brother, also an ex-Marine, could give for his brother's actions. Oswald, a diary. I can't read that. Something, employee to read, account his brother's actions while standing, something, delivery, I can't read that part. It says at the bottom, he said his brother went to Stripling Junior High School and thought he had attended Arlington Heights at least, and then it breaks off there. So remember, numerous times we have Robert Oswald testifying that Lee Oswald went to Stripling. But the official story, the government still denies it. The government says, nope, didn't happen. He went to Beauregard. So close that. All right, what is next? In 1962, Robert Oswald again told a Fort Worth newspaper reporter that his brother, Harvey Oswald, had attended Stripling. So that's 2 references to Stripling from Robert Lee Oswald. 1963, Frank Coodlady. In 1963, Frank Coodlady was the assistant principal at Stripling Junior High School. On April 2nd, 1963, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram had a short article that described Frank Coodlady as the assistant principal of Stripling. So we have an article here that shows that he was the assistant principal at Stripling. It says 7 months later, on November 23rd, 63, one day after the assassination, Mr. Coodlady received an early morning phone call from his boss, Mr. Wiley, the principal of Stripling Junior High School. Mr. Wiley told Coodlady to immediately go to Stripling and meet 2 FBI agents who would arrive shortly and give them Oswald's school records. In 1963, school records from prior years were kept at each school. In the mid-1960s, school records from all Fort Worth schools were transferred to the new Fort Worth Independent School District, where they were organized and stored. Frank told the author in a videotaped interview, "I lived close to the school at that time, arrived at the school before the FBI agents, got there. I went into the school and located Oswald's records. In fact, I found both Lee Harvey and Robert Oswald's records for Stripling. I opened Lee Harvey Oswald's folder and briefly looked over this record and noted that he had attended less than a full semester at Stripling. He'd been there long enough to receive grades for a 6-week period, but not long enough to receive semester grades. I think he was in the 9th grade. I put the records back in the folder. He waited for the FBI agents. When they arrived, they showed me their badges for identification and asked for the records. I told them that I had located both Lee Harvey and Robert Oswald's records and asked if they wanted both. They told me they only wanted Lee Harvey Oswald's records. After I handed the records to them, they thanked me and left. I locked up the school and went home. Harvey Oswald's junior high school records from Stripling, confiscated within 20 hours of the assassination, clearly show that FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover knew those Stripling records could expose the 2 Oswalds. The confiscation and disappearance of the Stripling records is another smoking gun and shows that Hoover probably had prior knowledge of Harvey and Lee. The next day, on November 24th, 63, 2 days after the assassination, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram published yet another article describing Oswald's attendance at Stripling. Oswald kept to himself, friends few, by John McConnell. I'm going to skip over most of this and start here. Apparently, he was proud of being a communist, the police chief stated. He didn't try to hide it. Oswald was born in New Orleans on October 18th, 1939. His father died before Oswald, the youngest son, was born. He moved to Fort Worth during early childhood with his mother. He attended Stripling Junior High and Arlington Heights High School before joining the Marines. So once again, another reference to him at Stripling High School. In 1964, Robert Oswald testified to the Warren Commission that he said his brother attended Stripling. The conversation went as follows. Mr. Oswald, just a minute, please. In 1952, Lee was 13 years old. He would be attending W.C. Stripling Junior High School then. And Mr. Jenner, Warren Commission, says, I see, for the school year 51-52? Yes, sir. Junior high school there was from 7th to 9th grades, and as soon as he was through with his 6th year, he started attending Stripling Junior High School. In the early 1990s, the author compared Robert Oswald's testimony concerning stripling and the Warren Commission records of Lee Harvey Oswald's school records. The school records showed the following. Oswald attended Ridgelea West Elementary, June 52, PS 117 and PS 44 in New York, fall of 52 through January of 54. Beauregard from January 54 until June of 55. Then Warren Easton High School in the fall of 55, then Arlington Heights High School in the fall of 56. That's it. That's the record, 5 schools. According to the Warren Commission, school records, Lee Harvey Oswald could not possibly have attended Stripling Junior High in Fort Worth. However, the Warren Commission is not aware of the 2 Oswalds. If they were, they intentionally ignored and avoided any reference to a second Lee Harvey Oswald. In 1994, the author contacted Mr. Ricardo Galindo, who was then principal of Stripling. Mr. Galindo told the author it was common knowledge that Lee Harvey Oswald attended Stripling. Galindo then suggested the author visit Fort Worth Independent School District to obtain a list of teachers who taught at Stripling in 1954. The author obtained the list, contacted many of these people, and learned from Mark Summers and Frank Kudlady that Oswald had attended Stripling Junior High School in the fall of 1954. The author then obtained a Stripling Junior High School student directory for 1954 and was able to contact many former students who remembered Oswald: Bobby Pitts, Jackie Pitts, Doug Gann, and Franchetta Schubert. The author soon realized that the FBI's top priority, even before being assigned to investigate the murder of JFK by President Johnson, was to locate and confiscate all records relating to a second Oswald. This is clearly indication that FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover knew about Lee Oswald and Harvey Oswald and knew about the Stripling records that could expose the 2 Oswalds. Hoover had to have prior knowledge of both Harvey and Lee. On May 11, 2002, the same Fort Worth newspaper published an article commemorating the 75th anniversary of Stripling School, noting that Lee Harvey Oswald was its best-known student and making note of the infamous Thomas Place address. Marguerite Oswald was living at 2220 Thomas Place on the day of the JFK assassination. And a little excerpt from it. Yet a 1956 student would best become the school's best known. For a few weeks, his mother moved several times across Fort Worth. A boy walked to Stripling from a house nearby. His mother was living in a home beside the school on Thomas Place by 1963 when the world learned the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. In November 2017, a Fort Worth Star-Telegram article indicated that Oswald's teachers and classmates remembered him at Stripling, although there was no official record. The records from Stripling Junior High were confiscated by the FBI the day after the assassination and quickly disappeared, but the evidence that Harvey Oswald attended Stripling Junior High is simply overwhelming. And the one person with firsthand knowledge of Harvey Oswald and his brief attendance at Stripling was Robert Oswald. Robert Oswald knew Harvey Oswald. So this is a big kicker. Robert Oswald was clearly in on this. Clearly in on the 2 Oswald scheme. Had to have been because he knew both parents. You know, both Marguerites and both brothers, right? In 1948, Robert Oswald was enrolled in the 9th grade at Stripling Junior High School in Fort Worth, the 48-49 school year. 6 years later, in 54, Harvey Oswald enrolled in the 9th grade at Stripling Junior High School. 2 years later, during the summer and fall of 56, Robert Oswald, Harvey Oswald, and the short, heavy-set Marguerite Oswald imposter were living at apartment 4936 Collinwood in Fort Worth, not far from Stripling. While living together in this small apartment, it's the author's opinion that Robert and Harvey discussed their attendance, teachers, and experiences at the nearby Stripling. This would explain how Robert Oswald learned Harvey had attended Stripling and would also explain how Robert was able to tell the Warren Commission that his, quote, brother had attended Stripling. Note, it is worth noting that during the summer of 1956, Robert's mother, the tall, nice-looking Marguerite Claverie Oswald, was still living in New Orleans and working at Gold Rings department store. Lee Oswald was also in New Orleans working under the supervision of Frank D. Benedetto at Gerard F. Touget Company. Late that summer, Marguerite Claverie Oswald relocated from New Orleans to Fort Worth and moved into an apartment at 3830 West 6th, not far from 4936 Collinwood. While in the Marines, her son Lee Oswald, not Harvey, resided with her when on leave from the Marine Corps. Harvey Oswald joined the Marines in October of 1956. Left Fort Worth and arrived at Camp Pendleton in California. 1 month later, in November, Robert Oswald married Vada Mercer, and Marguerite Oswald, imposter, was now alone in her apartment at 4936 Collinwood. During the time that Robert and Vada were dating, the summer and fall of 1956, Robert never introduced his future wife to Harvey Oswald, supposedly his brother, nor to the Marguerite Oswald imposter, supposedly his mother. This makes perfect sense because Harvey Oswald was not Robert's brother And the short, heavy-set Marguerite Oswald imposter was not Robert's mother. Robert Oswald clearly participated knowingly in the Oswald Project, which began around the same time the Central Agency was created in 1947. The CIA program began by allowing a very young Russian-speaking youth to share the identity of a young American boy, Lee Harvey Oswald. While growing up, both boys, American-born Lee Harvey Oswald and Russian-speaking Harvey Lee Oswald, would live in the same city, often attend the same schools, and at the age of 17, both young men would join the U.S. Marine Corps. The goal was for Harvey Oswald to assume the identity of Lee Oswald and defect to the Soviet Union, where he could secretly use his Russian language ability to collect information on behalf of the CIA. Robert Oswald likely met the Russian-speaking Harvey Oswald in New York City in the fall of 1953. 3 years later, Robert, Harvey, and the Marguerite Oswald imposter lived together at 4936 Collinwood in Fort Worth, Texas, from June through October of 1956. In 1958, Robert took a photo of his real brother, the taller, huskier Lee Oswald, which he published in his book titled Lee, A Portrait of Lee Harvey Oswald. 1 year later, Robert took a photo of 19-year-old Harvey Oswald, only a few days before he left the United States and defected to the Soviet Union. And he's got the two pictures here, the one of the husky Oswald that appears in his book and another. So Robert Oswald clearly involved in this scheme. Now, obviously, it's not a scheme to kill the president, right? It could only be a scheme to get a spy into the Soviet Union. It really can't be much more than that. It's rather fascinating. So it seems like we have an origin point, right? The Oswald Project going back to 47. God, I wish we could get some information on this. I'm sure every fucking piece of paper ever having to do with this has been burned. But that's going to wrap it up for today. We're going to stay on John Armstrong stuff for a while, hopefully. But that's going to do it for me today, guys. Tune in to Bloody History World War II, please, if you would. We're covering more David Irving. And yeah, that's going to do it for me today, guys. I will be back with more tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.